So I learned a new word this week. It's a word that I wish we didn't have quite so many occasions to use, but we do. And maybe you've heard it, I'm just late to the game, but the word is permacrisis. I found it in a 2025 article in The Guardian by Matthew Cantor. 2 months into 2025, he wrote, the sense of dread is palpable. In the U.S., the year began with a terrorist attack. And then came the fires that ravaged a city, destroying lives, homes, and livelihoods. An extremist billionaire came to power and began proudly dismantling the government with a chainsaw. You remember that? Once-in-a-century disasters are happening more like once a month, all amid devastating wars and on the heels of a pandemic. The word unprecedented has become ironically routine. It feels like we're stuck in a relentless cycle of calamity with no time to recover from one before the next begins. How do we make sense of all of this, let alone all at once? A number of terms have cropped up, Cantor writes, to help us describe our moment. We're living in the Anthropocene, the era in which humanity's impact is comparable to that of geology itself. Or we're in the post-truth era in which we no longer share the same sense of reality. But what we're facing is a permacrisis, an endless state of catastrophe. Now, whether or not that's true, that the global chaos of our time is any more or less chaotic than other times in history, it certainly feels like it. It feels that way because we're not evolved to handle the constant stream of catastrophe that technology is bringing to us on a moment-to-moment basis, vying for our monetized attention with increasingly unprecedented headlines. We've got 3 stories about climate crisis and 2 videos of police brutality waiting for us before the coffee is ready. It's overwhelming, and it can be paralyzing. It can move us to despair or this nihilistic sense of helplessness. Or, as I'm sure many of us have done or been tempted to do, just numbing ourselves or looking away, trying to cope with the endless onslaught. That is the impact of permacrisis. So what do we do? I'm sure most of us know the name Greta Thunberg. We recognize her now from her efforts to bring attention to climate crisis through school strikes and her transatlantic voyages. But a lot of people don't know where her activism efforts came from in the first place. When I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, she said in a 2019 article, I first learned about the climate crisis in school. My teachers taught me about it, and we saw films and pictures of plastic in the oceans and extreme weather events. Those pictures were just stuck in my head. And I thought, there's no point in anything. So then I became very depressed. By the time I was 11, I just felt empty, like there was no point in anything. And I didn't have energy to do anything. I don't remember much from that time, I just remember that it was dark. I know a lot of people feel that way, she went on, that they don't matter and they can't do anything about climate crisis. And they just feel worried and scared. But, she said, the best medicine against that concern and sadness is to do something about it, to try to make a change. Of course, it's difficult to think about the climate crisis, but that's not an excuse for not doing anything. Even if there's no hope, we have to do everything in our power. In the face of permacrisis, caught in that isolating, paralyzing shell of despair, a teenaged Greta Thunberg found the key to unlocking her reconnection to purpose, to meaning. And that key was agency. Agency, however small, is a superpower that can not only help us cope with the pain of permacrisis, but can reconnect us with the sacred work of co-creating and shaping the world. Our tradition is full of people taking meaningful action in the face of overwhelming crisis. As Rome conquered the world and the people of Jerusalem walked past lines of crosses every day, those following the way of Jesus coped by feeding one another, washing one another's feet, telling stories and teaching of another kingdom. They also found ways to stand up and speak truth to power, to nonviolently resist the empire and creatively interrupt patterns of oppression. Their ways of taking agency varied by ability and circumstance, but they owned their power by doing something. The best medicine against that concern and sadness, Thunberg said, is to do something about it. And that's the dynamic I'd like to look at together this morning. So first, it would be helpful to take a deeper look at what causes this sense of overwhelm, this paralysis. The first practical instruction of Buddhism is to identify the suffering, but the second is to identify its cause. And most often at the root, we'll find a particular story that we get sucked into believing. So what is that story here that causes us to react to permacrisis with despair? There are probably several, but the main culprit, I believe, is this assumption that it's all on us, that we are the heroes of this story, and we need to fix it. And in reality, I think there's a healthier alternative. Once I had the chance to hear a spiritual teacher and an activist who had lived through the Troubles in Ireland. We were at this conference about spirituality and social action in Montreat, North Carolina, which is this beautiful retreat center in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And he was sharing things he's learned about how his spirituality sustains his work as an activist. And as he taught, spouting off one brilliant thing after another, he used this image that stuck with me. And he said something like this: in our work, most of us are trying to be the main characters in the story, he said. It's like we're trying to star in an off-Broadway show that no one really seems to want to come to. And it's exhausting. It's overwhelming. The perspective of spirituality, however, shows us that we don't have to run this show. Our deeper calling isn't to some off-Broadway show that won't ever make much of a splash, but about becoming a supporting actor in the greatest show of all time, on the grandest stage of all time. It's to let go and be just a backup dancer in a show where the main character was never any one person, but love itself. That's the story we're a part of. So it's not all on us. The assumption that we have to be the main character can paralyze us. It can burn us out like nobody's business. There is great liberation, however, in owning that we don't have to be the hero. We're playing our parts in a show that was going long before we stepped onto the stage, and it will keep going long after we step off. Teresa of Avila once pointed out that it's not our hands that bless the world, but the hands of the divine working through us. Yours are the feet with which the divine walks to do good. In the face of permacrisis, we don't have to be heroes. We only have to step in and help shape a process that we didn't see begin and we won't see end. We take agency as co-creators in a much larger story of love and healing. So, there's an important implication here. If we aren't the center of the story, if we aren't responsible for the whole of the permacrisis, what are we supposed to do? There's a teacher and an author named Rob Bell who once recorded an audiobook with the audacious title, A Fiery and Sobering Guide to Doing What You Love and Also Still Somehow Paying the Bills. It's this collection of stories and reflections on the overlap between vocation and practicality. And in that collection, he shares that there was this season where he was convinced he needed to be an activist. Now, had he ever done activism? No. Did he have any particular skills suited to activism? No. But did he feel energized at the idea of being an activist? Also no. He had nothing going on for him but this vague, culturally imposed impression that being a community organizing activist was the only real way to make a difference. So he dove headfirst into that world. He sat on boards. He coordinated projects. He learned as much as he could about issues he felt passionately about. And after a while, predictably, he started to feel a bit hollow. He describes this experience of looking around at this team that he's working with at one point, each of whom were gifted in community organizing and enjoyed the work of adaptive leadership, and thinking, what am I doing here? Where was it that I learned that my vocation wasn't enough? So he shares, after seeing through this stint as a solidly mediocre activist, he let go of that self-image and went back to being great at doing what he loved. There, he came alive. He found his entry point into becoming a supporting character in this grander story of love and healing, where he really could contribute what was his to contribute. Don't ask yourself first what the world needs, Howard Thurman once wrote. Ask what makes you come alive, and go out and do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. The closing hymn that we're going to sing later goes, with gifts that differ by your grace, your spirit fills us all, that people in each time and place may answer when you call. You strengthen some to take a stand, to prophesy or preach, while others give with an open hand, or heal the sick or teach. The divine does not call us to do everything. The divine invites us simply to discern what is ours to do next. And this brings us to a last question. If we cope with permacrisis by taking place in that greater story, and we take our place in that story by discerning what is ours to do next, then what happens, having done all that, when the story still doesn't seem to move forward? What happens when we stand up and speak the truth? When we create our art, when we connect with our neighbors, when we stand in the way of injustice, and still the headlines keep coming. Empire keeps winning. The needle doesn't move, at least not for long. Does that mean that we are failures? And maybe it really is hopeless after all? And I think this is where a significant shift in the frame is required. And I don't know that we can see that any more powerfully than we find it in one particular sacred text. You're probably familiar with it and how powerful it has been through history. And I'm referring, of course, to Bill Murray's Groundhog Day. Mock me if you will, but Groundhog Day is one of my favorite movies of all time. Thank you. I can promise you now this will not be the last time you hear about it in a homily from me. If you've somehow made it the last 33 years without seeing Groundhog Day, first of all, how? Second of all, it's the story of this grumpy and unsatisfied weatherman named Phil Connors, played by the incomparable Bill Murray, who travels to Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, to cover the story of whether the groundhog, Phil, the iconic weatherman, will see his shadow. However, by a magical twist of fate found in so much of 90s cinema, Phil finds himself stuck living the same day over and over again until he too can see his own shadow, metaphorically, of course. And in the movie, there's this one scene where Phil is sitting in a bar next to these two other guys, and he's slipping into the despair of being caught in these powers that are so much bigger than him. And he asks one of these guys next to him, what would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was exactly the same and nothing you did mattered? And one guy lets the question sink in and answers, well, that about sums it up for me. And that's familiar, isn't it? In this permacrisis, that we seem caught by powers so much bigger than us, caught in this recurring loop of senseless violence and tragedy. And so what does Phil do? After sinking into the darkest places that he's allowed to go in a comedy, living out what literally could have been hundreds of years of the same day, Phil finally hits a turning point. He realizes that maybe there's a different standard to live by than progress, than moving a needle. He starts to learn piano because that is what brings him to life. He starts to connect with the people in this small town, hearing their stories because it brings him out of himself. He starts to change the same tire every day for the same group of older folks who need help because it feels meaningful. And slowly he finds his way to enter into this grander story of love, and it's not through the illusion of progress, but the simplicity of participation in something bigger than himself. One wise teacher compared the work of fighting permacrisis to the work of doing laundry. It's never done. Laundry doesn't work like that. It's something we return to over and over in a cycle, a process that we participate in. The fact that hunger returns does not make feeding someone pointless. The fact that grief returns doesn't make comfort pointless. The fact that injustice returns doesn't make resistance pointless. In fact, if you think that our work has to move some kind of long-term needle to really matter, find a hospice worker and ask what they do and why. Like Phil, we discover that even when there is no measurable progress, even when suffering returns again and again, it's the participation in something greater that can connect us to life abundant. And I hope we can be empowered by that this morning. In seeing that, in this time of unprecedented permacrisis, it's agency, however small, that reconnects us to the sacred work of co-creating and shaping the world. That, as Greta Thunberg said, the best medicine against that concern and sadness is to do something about it. And I wonder what that means for you as an individual. I wonder what that means for us as a congregation. What is our agency in this season, in this moment? As we go and discern our answers to this question, may we do it remembering that it's not all on us, and that we are supporting roles in this greater story of love and healing. May we find what makes us come alive and lean in, simply doing what is ours to do next. And even when it feels like there is no measurable progress, may we continue to participate in that greater story, because that is where life abundant can be found. Amen.